Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Bai Xiaochun closed his eyes, almost as if he weren't worried at all about the incoming Kai clan patriarch. Instead, he sank into the feeling of becoming one with everything around him. He was heaven, he was earth, he was the will of all creation. So, this is what it's like to be a diva. One with everything. Right now, he felt like the wave of his hand could draw upon all the power of heaven and earth to crush anything in his path. It was almost as if heaven and earth were an empty body, and a diva could become the will of that body, controlling it in every aspect. Of course, there was more than just a single will within that heaven and earth, controlling it. There were other devas who also vied for control. In fact, Bai Xiaochun could sense another such will right there in front of him, drawing upon the incredible energy of heaven and earth to attack him. Bai Xiaochun's eyes snapped open, and when he did, his entire person thrummed with power. Rumble. His energy surged, and not only did that put him on equal footing with the Kai clan patriarch, but his 4 clones were also powering up in exactly the same fashion. Return, Bai Xiaochun said, waving his sleeve. Immediately, his 4 clones merged back into his body, causing his energy to rise even higher. He had already been half a step into the demigod realm, but now that he had merged with his clones, he became even more powerful. Rumbling sounds echoed out as he broke through another level, and an aura appeared which shocked even the giant Ghost King. The giant Ghost King had been teetering on the verge of unconsciousness. However, he bit his tongue to produce some clarity, which was exactly when that terrifying aura erupted out from Bai Xiaochun. The giant Ghost King gasped, and his heart became completely filled with incredulity. He used only 1 drop of my soul blood to actually produce a demigod aura. How is this possible? He'll only get 1 attack out of it, but it still shouldn't be possible. If the wide-eyed giant Ghost King had such a reaction, there was little need to mention the Kai clan patriarch. His mind was reeling, and his scalp was tingling so hard it felt like it might explode. Before he could say anything else, though. Bai Xiaochun's eyes shone with intense light, his heart was pounding wildly as he felt the fusion between himself and heaven and earth. However, there was something a bit fuzzy, as if the previously wide world was now cramped and narrow. It almost felt as if using all the power at his disposal would break beyond this heaven and earth. So, this is the difference between a diva and a demigod, huh? Bai Xiaochun knew that what he was experiencing was something beyond precious. Extending his right hand, he made a grasping motion, whereupon a red spear emerged from his bag of holding. The instant that spear appeared, the entire sky filled with thunderous rumbling. At the same time, the sea of lightning up above stopped moving, and even began to distort, as though something were interfering with it. The wind, the land, the air, everything grew still. Even the Kai clan patriarch stopped moving, causing his face to fill with a mass of shock and disbelief. The only thing in the world that could move was Bai Xiaochun, and the long red spear. This red spear was how the giant Ghost King had made a name for himself. Normally speaking, Bai Xiaochun should never have been able to wield it, but now that he held it in his hand, piercing howls could be heard coming from inside of it, almost as if it thirsted to taste blood. Further, it was now possible to just barely make out 9 blood dragons on the surface of the spear, all of them roaring at the Kai clan patriarch. Those 9 dragons were why this spear was named, the 9 dragons god-slaying spear. Bai Xiaochun's eyes gleamed with killing intent, and as everything in the world went still, he gripped the spear and stabbed it toward the Kai clan patriarch. That simple stabbing motion became a rapidly spinning black hole that unleashed terrifyingly destructive power of heaven and earth. In the same way that a canvas painting could be shredded to pieces, the silence was broken, the wind shattered, and the earth quaked. The destructive power was such that the nearby members of the Kai clan began to cough up massive volumes of blood, and some of them were even shredded into masses of gore, destroyed in body and soul. Even more shocking, the sea of lightning in the sky was destroyed as easily as if it were made of dried twigs. The black hole completely consumed all of the lightning. And yet, things weren't over yet. There was no way the Kai clan patriarch would be able to complete the blow with his lightning axe. Cracking sounds could be heard as the axe began to fall apart, and then, the Kai clan patriarch, physically exploded. A piercing scream could be heard as his body collapsed into a mass of blood. At that point, he flew out in nascent divinity form, his face a mass of shock and terror as he tried to flee. But the black hole's power was formidable, and no matter what the nascent divinity patriarch did to try to escape, he was sucked backward. No, no, he screamed, overwhelmed by fear and terror. Never could he possibly have imagined that one drop of the giant ghost king's soul blood could push someone all the way to the demigod level. It was completely absurd and unbelievable. In fact, it really was impossible for the giant ghost king to do something like that, to the point where the patriarch wondered if the giant ghost king's cultivation base was actually beyond the demigod level and had reached the Mahayana realm. 1. But that was completely impossible. Therefore, the only other explanation was that there was something uniquely special about this Bai Hao. Regardless of the explanation, the Kai clan patriarch was now in a deadly situation. His nascent divinity screamed as he was sucked toward the black hole. However, just before he was pulled all the way in, a tremor ran through Bai Xiaochun, and his demigod cultivation base began to drop. In the blink of an eye, he was all the way back in core formation, where he had started. The sensation of vast power from moments ago was gone. Suddenly being wrenched back into core formation was not easy to handle, and he immediately coughed up a massive mouthful of blood. As he staggered backward, the long red spear faded, and the 9 howling dragons disappeared. What a pity, he murmured to himself. The feeling of incredible power that he had just experienced had been entrancing, to say the least. The black hole vanished, and the Kai clan patriarch in nascent divinity form shivered, feeling like he had just stepped halfway into the gates of the netherworld. He instantly burst into motion, traveling 3,000 meters away in the blink of an eye. When he turned to look back, he saw the light of teleportation completely washing over Bai Xiaochun. The patriarch shivered again, fear lingering inside him at the sensation of having nearly been killed. He knew without a doubt that if Bai Xiaochun's aura had lasted even a moment longer, he would have been killed. As of this moment, his fleshly body was destroyed, but his nascent divinity remained. His life was saved. However, the only thing he felt inside was bitterness, terror, and madness. They made it out of Giant Ghost City. If we don't find them, then the Giant Ghost King will be back in only a few months. Demigod, he can kill devas with the simple swipe of a spear. Trembling, the patriarch threw his head back and howled. Then, he turned and headed toward the Chen clan. After all, the tribulation to come would rain down on all 3 great clans, and therefore, they all needed to work together to resolve the situation. They needed to come to an agreement that, even if one of them were to be seriously injured, the other 2 would still make a move. There could be no more infighting between them. Right now, they had to focus all their resources on hunting down the giant ghost king and Bai Hao. Furthermore, the Kai clan patriarch felt confident that the teleportation formation couldn't have taken them extremely far away. His guess was that, at most, its range was roughly 50,000 kilometers. As the Kai clan patriarch left to confer with the patriarchs of the Chen and Bai clans, countless people within Giant Ghost City were reacting to what had just occurred with Bai Hao. All of the power groups, all of the soul cultivators, came to hear about the matter, and were struck with indescribable shock. He seriously injured the patriarchs of the Bai and Chen clan, and even destroyed the fleshly body of the Kai clan patriarch. This Bai Hao is so strong. Heavens! This Bai Hao single-handedly dominated all 3 of the great clans. The giant ghost king escaped. If he recovers and comes back, the 3 great clans and the 6 heavenly marquises will all be crushed like weeds. And Bai Hao? Well, it doesn't matter how he might have offended the giant ghost king in the past, after risking his life the way he did, he'll definitely become one of the most important people in all of Giant Ghost City. 1. Very astute readers may remember that the Mahayana realm was actually brought up way back in chapter 180. Not even 40 hours had passed since the outbreak of rebellion in Giant Ghost City. During that short period of time, drastic changes had occurred, which the people of the city found outrageous and terrifying. First, the 9 Serenities king had made his probing attack. Then the 6 marquises revolted. 4 devas joined the fray. The giant ghost king had not even been able to make a stand, and yet, that was only the beginning. When it was revealed that the giant ghost king was only a clone, the second phase of the event began. The entire city was turned upside down as the rebels searched for the giant ghost king's true self. That was when Bai Hao showed up on the scene, holding the giant ghost king's true self captive. Everything which occurred after that would be fixed for all time in the memories of those who had been present. 3 powerful devas were seriously injured, and then Bai Hao and the giant ghost king escaped the city. From that moment on, Bai Hao would be completely famous within Giant Ghost City. In fact, it was easy to imagine how his name would soon spread to the wildlands at large. In a mountain range about 50,000 kilometers away from Giant Ghost City, Bai Xiaochun could be seen speeding along, face ashen, carrying an old man on his back. The man was withered and wrinkled, and his aura was virtually undetectable. In fact, even close examination would lead one to think that he was actually a corpse. Of course, that old man was none other than the giant Ghost King. It was hard to say if his current condition was a result of him sacrificing a drop of soul blood or because of his decay period. Either way, he was completely and utterly unconscious. His virtually indestructible body was now so profoundly weak that it seemed possible for an ordinary knife to cut through him and end his life. Bai Xiaochun's aura was also unstable. The giant Ghost King had slipped into unconsciousness right after the two of them teleported out of the city, several hours before. Bai Xiaochun had also been seriously injured, and the soul blood had done nothing to heal him. Although he had received vital enlightenment after he slipped out of the demigod realm, his injuries all flared up, leaving him feeling incredibly weak. Thankfully, his fleshly body was very strong, so he gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay conscious. After seeing that the giant Ghost King was unconscious, he decided not to drag him around by the neck anymore, and instead slung him over his back. Bai Xiaochun knew that he was still wrapped up in a momentous event. The three great clans would not rest until he was dead, and it was the same with the 6 heavenly marquises. As for the latter, because none of them had a diva, and he had been zipping around the city via teleportation formation, he hadn't encountered any of them. But that didn't mean he wouldn't in the future. It was easy to imagine that both the 3 great clans and the forces of the 6 heavenly marquises would do everything possible to find him. It's a good thing I don't need to hold on for very much longer. Just a few days, then the giant Ghost King will recover. Although, I wonder if that drop of soul blood will change things. He sighed. If the giant Ghost King hadn't given him that drop of soul blood, and he had been forced into a corner, then maybe he would have given the man up. At that point, he wouldn't have felt too bad. But considering how things had developed, he simply couldn't do that. Bai Xiaochun had deeply ingrained principles when it came to paying back debts. He felt moved by how the giant Ghost King had helped him, which was actually a bit contrary to how he had planned for things to turn out. Whatever. Sighing, he continued onward through the mountains, the giant Ghost King on his back. Soon it was evening, and the sky was starting to grow dark. Bai Xiaochun wanted to keep going, but his injuries were so bad that he couldn't. Furthermore, the giant Ghost King's aura was getting so weak that at times that he couldn't even sense it. The man's body was also starting to grow cold. Nervous, Bai Xiaochun found a suitable spot to hew out a cave for use as a temporary shelter. Using what scant bit of his cultivation base was left, he made a small bonfire and then propped the giant Ghost King up in front of it. Unfortunately, the giant Ghost King's complexion was ashen, and he only seemed to be getting colder as time progressed. His aura was currently very weak. You can't die, Bai Xiaochun said. Standing up, he patted his bag of holding to produce some medicinal items useful for treating injuries. Unfortunately, even after forcing them into the giant Ghost King's mouth, nothing happened. What do I do? What do I do? He thought about asking the little turtle for some advice, but there was no trace of him. No amount of angry threatening got him to stick his head out, so Bai Xiaochun finally gave up. Then he sat there looking at the ice-cold giant Ghost King for a while before finally slapping his own thigh. I know what to do, he thought, his eyes shining. There was definitely something that could heat the giant Ghost King up, but as he contemplated it, he hesitated. Unsure of whether the giant Ghost King could hear him or not, he said, Hey, giant Ghost King old pal, I'm only doing this to save you, alright? No hard feelings. With that, he pulled out an aphrodisiac pill, which he then placed into the giant Ghost King's mouth. Bai Xiaochun remembered how all the prisoners who consumed aphrodisiac pills always got very hot, and even sweated profusely. At the moment, he was in a desperate situation and was grasping at straws, but had no other alternatives. Worried that one pill might not be enough, he pulled out a few more, and then stuffed them into the giant Ghost King's mouth. Almost immediately, the giant Ghost King shivered, and got a bit warmer. His previously fading aura began to fluctuate, and a bit of color even returned to his skin. Bai Xiaochun breathed a sigh of relief, and at the same time, his face shone with pride at the fact that, in his genius, he had created a medicinal pill that could be used both to interrogate prisoners and save lives. Geniuses like me are always lonely. At this point, he was finally starting to relax. If the giant Ghost King had died, then everything he had done up to this point would have been for nothing. As he calmed down, he thought back to everything which had occurred in Giant Ghost City, and his heart trembled with lingering fear. Frowning, he reviewed all of his actions. I got too impulsive. I shouldn't have listened to the little turtle. 3 devas? I can't believe I actually escaped from 3 devas. The thought of how he had put everything on the line left him gasping. Even the slightest mistake, and he would have died. I always say that I'm not going to do anything dangerous ever again. How come I always do, though? Frowning, he realized that his personality was changing, and that he was actually becoming braver. Wait a second, that's not a good thing. Deeply worried, he looked over at the giant ghost king, and then up at the evening sky and the moon, which was just barely visible. Finally, he sighed. I sure hope that what the little turtle said is true. The giant ghost king had better recover in the next couple days. And so he sat there nervously, surrounded by silence. Considering how exhausted he was and how quiet the area was, he soon began to think back to what it had been like to rise to the diva level, and then beyond that, to the demigod level. Eventually, his eyes began to shine with both confusion and desire. The diva realm. So that's what it feels like. And the demigod realm. It almost seems possible to break through heaven and earth. The sensations he felt after absorbing the soul blood, and the enlightenment he had received, were forever branded onto his heart. At the same time, his desire to grow stronger increased. I want to become a diva. I want to become a demigod. Remembering that he needed to change his way of thinking, he tried to inwardly focus on the longevity aspect. I guess becoming a demigod would mean I could live even longer, right? Time passed. Even before the night was through, Bai Xiaochun felt rested. After checking on the giant ghost king to make sure he wasn't getting any colder, he once again put him on his back and then flew out of the cave. It was in that manner, only resting when absolutely necessary, that Bai Xiaochun proceeded along for 3 days. The giant ghost king was unconscious the entire time, and didn't show any signs of waking up. As for Bai Xiaochun, thanks to his powerful fleshly body, his wounds were recovering nicely. However, the anxiety in his heart continued to mount. He knew that with every bit of time that passed in which the giant ghost king didn't wake up, it meant that the 3 great clans would be getting closer. Eventually, on evening of the 3rd day, as he was flying along, the sky above him began to rumble loudly. A voice filled with boundless venom suddenly echoed out. Bai Hao. Bai Xiaochun looked up into the sky and saw 3 enormous faces, each of them hundreds of meters tall. They were none other than the patriarchs of the 3 great clans. The one who had spoken was the Kai clan patriarch, who had lost his fleshly body. His eyes burned with killing intent, and he was surrounded by a sea of lightning that pulsed with metal-type power. That indicated that this lightning could give birth to metal, and supreme-grade metal at that. Next to the Kai clan patriarch were the patriarchs from the Bai and Chen clans. Both of them had very serious expressions on their faces, without a trace of the derision with which they had previously looked at Bai Xiaochun. In fact, they almost seemed to view him as an equal. Anyone unfamiliar with the situation who saw that would surely be shocked. After all, these were devas, and Bai Xiaochun was only in the great circle of the gold core stage. This was simply the kind of respect that Bai Xiaochun could earn when he used full force. As for the Bai clan patriarch, a strange, mysterious light flickered through his eyes. Bai Hao, considering that you're a member of the Bai clan, if you simply hand the giant ghost king over, I'll count it as a meritorious service and pronounce you clan chief. The rumbling pressure coming from the Bai clan patriarch completely surpassed that of the other 2 patriarchs. Although the Kai clan patriarch didn't seem very happy about what the Bai clan patriarch had just said, he didn't say anything. Clearly, the patriarchs had come to an agreement of some sort. However, when it came to the Chen clan patriarch, his desire to kill Bai Hao had actually far surpassed that of the Kai clan patriarch, although no one knew that. The things Bai Hao had accomplished so far were completely shocking, so much so that they would eventually shake all of the wildlands. As a result, the Chen clan patriarch was absolutely certain that if Bai Hao returned to the Bai clan, they would eventually control all of Giant Ghost City. We can't leave him alive, he thought. If he sticks around, the Bai clan will get so powerful that nobody will be able to stop them. Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times and braced himself as he looked up into the sky at the 3 patriarchs. Although the Bai clan patriarch's offer seemed great, Bai Xiaochun didn't trust him at all. Sighing inwardly, he tried to decide what to do when, all of a sudden, a voice entered his ears that he hadn't heard for several days. It was none other than the little turtle. Don't agree, little punk, he said urgently. Lord Turtle hasn't appeared for the past few days because he didn't dare to. Damn it, I knew something was off. The giant ghost king is already awake. He woke up much earlier. If Lord Turtle's guess is correct, he's actually already back at full strength. The wily old fox. Listen, punk, I've been helping you out for a long time now, but this time, I had to make a lot of preparations to be able to send you this message behind the giant ghost king's back. He's a demigod, after all. I have to go now, so as for what exactly you should do now, just play it by ear. Bai Xiaochun was complexly flabbergasted, but didn't let it show on his face. After glancing back at the giant ghost king for a moment, he looked up in thought. Then, his veins of steel began to pulse, making it seem to those who could see him as if he would continue on his current course no matter what setbacks he encountered. His eyes were now bloodshot, and he stood there looking like a lone wolf, valiant and heroic. Swishing his sleeve, he spoke out in a hoarse voice that was both decisive and fierce, "Forget it. On the day that I, Bai Hao, left the Bai clan, I swore an oath to never again be part of that clan. Although you are surnamed Bai just like I am, the meaning of that character is completely different between the two of us. The giant ghost king gave me a new lease on life, and is like a brother to me. I promised to keep him safe for a month, and I'll do that no matter what. You people want the giant ghost king? Sure, you can have him. By stepping over my dead body." As he spoke, his voice grew louder and louder, until he was shouting with dauntless courage. There was a lofty arrogance to his words that would make anyone who didn't know him think that he was the most noble and righteous type of person in the world. "Even if I, Bai Hao, end up dying in the process, I will never hand over my brother the giant ghost king. I didn't abandon him in Giant Ghost City, and I'm not going to abandon him here." Even as his words rang out, he unleashed the power of his cultivation base. Making sure the giant ghost king was secure on his back, he began to flee again, musing about how amazing his speech had been just now. After hearing it, there was no way the giant ghost king wouldn't be moved. At the same time, he was feeling quite nervous, not because of the three devas, but because of the fact that he knew the giant ghost king to be a very slippery character. He also couldn't stop thinking about how he had slapped the man on the side of the head several times. Up above, none of the three clan patriarchs said anything in response. Suddenly, the huge face which represented the Kai clan patriarch blurred, and he emerged from its forehead in nascent divinity form. As he looked down at Bai Xiaochun, his lips quivered as though he were murmuring something. Then, thunderous rumbling could be heard as several lightning bolts appeared and shot toward Bai Xiaochun. As they moved through the air, they formed together into a sphere of lightning, pulsing with shocking energy that caused the air around it to distort and then ignite into flames. As that happened, the Chen clan patriarch also emerged from the giant face that represented him. Brightly colored light flashed in heaven and earth as the entire 50-kilometer area around him suddenly became an enormous ceiling mark. Bai Xiaochun's eyes opened wide. Aware that he couldn't avoid this attack, he looked at the incoming sphere of lightning and roared, "Even if I die, I'll never let any of you hurt my big bro." He stamped his foot onto the ground, causing a huge crater to appear below. Then he gently put the giant ghost king down behind him and pulled out his eternal parasol to defend the both of them. Massive rumbling sounds echoed out, and the ground quaked. Rifts spread out as sparks of electricity showered about in all directions, creating something like a lake of lightning. The eternal parasol twisted and distorted, and behind it, Bai Xiaochun trembled and coughed up a huge mouthful of blood. He was trembling on the verge of collapse, bones breaking inside of him as he withstood the force of the attack. After it was over, he gritted his teeth, grabbed the giant ghost king again, and took to flight. As he sped along, he continued to cough up blood. An expression of despair appeared on his face as he looked at the giant ghost king and then spoke in a voice so soft only the two of them could hear. "Everyone dies one day. Compared to the kindness you have shown me, my brother, what does death count for?" At this point, his expression of despair began to turn into one of madness. "I just hate the fact that my cultivation base is so weak. And the fact that I can't fulfill my promise to you, my brother." With that, he threw his head back and roared in frustration. Inside, he was thinking that he had continued with the act for long enough. If things kept going on like they were, he really would be flirting with disaster. He had gone all out to defend against that attack just now, and knew that the only reason he had survived was because the Kai clan patriarch was in nascent divinity form, making his attacks much weaker than normal. If the Chen or Bai clan patriarchs attacked him in his current state, he probably wouldn't be able to take it. How far does the giant ghost king want to take this? If he doesn't do something soon, I'll end up dead, and so will he. Bai Xiaochun was virtually weeping inside by this point. Up above, the Bai clan patriarch sighed in regret about how things were turning out. However, he was a cold-hearted person, and therefore, since this Bai Hao was just too stubborn, he knew he had to act. "Fine then, just die," he said, launching a fist strike toward the ground. Rumble. A huge, illusory fist appeared, and as it descended, incredible pressure weighed down in all directions. That fist represented the will of the heavens, and was so powerful that it could destroy anything it touched. Within moments, it was bearing down on Bai Xiaochun, causing the ground to quake dangerously. An intense sensation of deadly crisis erupted inside of Bai Xiaochun. He could tell that this was not the type of attack he could absorb in defense. Nor could he evade it in time. If it hit him, he would be killed beyond the shadow of a doubt. Fudge, he shouted inwardly. Come on, giant ghost king, don't tell me you really do want me dead? Although he was shaking and terrified, the words that actually came out of his mouth were a bit different than his inner monologue. It's not that I don't want to live up to my promise, my brother. I really do. I guess the only thing now is for the both of us to stroll the pathways of the Yellow Springs together. He looked up at the enormous fist, his heart filled not with terror and alarm, but with peace. Although he was trembling physically, he wasn't nervous or scared anymore. He knew that if the little turtle was correct, and the giant ghost king really was awake, abandoning him wasn't a viable option. Furthermore, considering how things had developed just now, there was no way he could escape from the three diva patriarchs this time. No more gambling and no more acts, he thought. Fudge, I guess if I'm really gonna lose my life, then I sure as hell am not going to go out looking terrified. Gritting his teeth, he put the giant ghost king behind him protectively. Even as the entire world filled with heaven shaking, earth-shattering rumbling, and the enormous fist was about to crush Bai Xiaochun, even as a huge crater opened up beneath him, and nearby mountains crumbled into dust, even as the air shattered. The Bai clan patriarch, instead of breathing a sigh of relief, suddenly began to tremble. His eyes went wide with disbelief, and his face fell as he shouted, Giant Ghost King. He wasn't the only one to react in such a way. The Chen and Kai clan patriarchs both began to shake, their minds reeling as though they were being struck by hundreds of thousands of lightning bolts. Never could they possibly have imagined that in this exact moment, the person who had just been lying unconscious behind Bai Xiaochun would suddenly stand up and walk forward. He was none other than the Giant Ghost King. This game is now over. The voice which rang out was as cold as ice. He spoke 5 simple words, and yet, he was a heavenly king and demigod expert. His energy was the type that heaven and earth could not support, and it even caused black clouds to roil in the sky above. The 3 patriarchs immediately began to shake under the pressure. The giant ghost king didn't even need to draw upon the power of his cultivation base. His mere threatening gaze was enough to cause the 3 patriarchs to tremble in place. This was the giant ghost king. As of this moment, he seemed to make all colors in heaven and earth fade away. It was as if all creation could do nothing but tremble and bow to him. That was because he was a demigod expert. That was because he was one of the 4 heavenly kings of the wildlands. That was because he was the giant ghost king. As he stood there in front of Bai Xiaochun, he slowly extended his right hand, a hand that seemed powerful enough to hold up the heavens. Instantly, the Bai clan patriarch's divine ability was nullified. The 300-meter area surrounding the giant ghost king was completely unaffected by it. The giant ghost king's body was rapidly reverting from that of an old man to a younger one. His white hair became black, and the wrinkles on his face vanished. His withered frame filled in, and in the blink of an eye, a somber expression could be seen on his face. A royal crown appeared on his head, and he now wore a violet robe with a serpentine dragon embroidered on it. As of this moment, he seemed more noble than anything else in the world. The Bai clan patriarch was trembling, and his eyes were bulging out of his head so violently they seemed like they might explode. At the same time, an icy coldness filled his heart that seemed cold enough to freeze the world. The Chen clan patriarch had a similar reaction. Panting in terror, he felt as if he were drowning at the bottom of the sea, a sea so powerful that it could crush him and his clan out of existence. The Kai clan patriarch only existed as a nascent divinity now. He was just as shocked, and because he didn't have a physical body to sustain some of the crushing pressure he felt, it all weighed down on his nascent divinity, causing it to twist and distort. Inside, he was screaming in terror at the realization that he and the other 2 patriarchs had completely misjudged the giant ghost king. He had not needed 3 months to recover, or even 1. In fact, he hadn't even required half a month. He had recovered in 5 days. Only 5 days had passed since the rebellion began, and during that time, the giant ghost king had already recovered. The Kai clan patriarch understood everything now, and couldn't help but think back to the sight of the giant ghost king's clone, hovering there above the ruins of the royal palace, a look of complete disdain and contempt in his eyes as he had uttered a very simple sentence. This has all been nothing more than a game. The Bai and Chen clan patriarchs also recalled those words, and suddenly, the entire world around them seemed to go as still and quiet as death. They hovered there in the air, people who could normally look down condescendingly upon all heaven and earth. And yet, as of this moment, they felt as if they were looking up in awe and fear at the person in front of Bai Xiaochun. As for Bai Xiaochun, he stood there, jaw agape, almost incapable of believing that he was still alive. It seemed almost like a dream that the giant ghost king really was awake, with his cultivation base restored, leaving the three diva patriarchs shaken to the core. Of course, he was also deeply nervous about what was to come. I hope the giant ghost king has a good impression of me and forgets about everything that happened before. He absolutely, positively had better not be holding a grudge. As Bai Xiaochun stood there, his heart trembling with anxiety, the three patriarchs looked down with flickering expressions. Then, the Kai clan patriarch let out an ear-piercing shriek as he spun and began to flee. There was no other option for him. Even if it meant his clan ended up being wiped out, he had no alternative other than to try to escape. He could always establish a new clan, but if he died, then everything would definitely be over. However, he was the only one to make such a choice. The Bai and Chen clan patriarchs, in their bitterness, chose instead to power up their cultivation bases and attack the giant ghost king. The rebellion had been a huge gamble. If they had won in the end, they could have achieved a meteoric rise. Now that they had clearly lost, they knew that there would be a price to pay, and that they would never be able to escape. The two of you really do have some courage, the giant ghost king said coolly. Although his words were spoken with calm, they contained indescribable pressure, the type that could rebuke all of heaven and earth. Instead of lowering his right hand, he clenched it into a fist, then stood tall and straight before unleashing a fist strike at the incoming devas. It almost seemed like a casual motion, without any hints of containing a magical technique or divine ability. And yet, because of it, everything in the area seemed to grow dark. It was as if the entire world were spinning as a huge vortex opened up, a gaping, sinister mouth ready to gobble up the two patriarchs. Incredible rumbling sounds could be heard as blood sprayed from the mouth of the Bai clan patriarch. A scream rang out as his body teetered on the verge of collapsing. Then, he was sucked into the huge mouth. The Chen clan patriarch laughed in bitter defiance before he too vanished into the vortex. One fist had completely overwhelmed two devas. They vanished without a trace remaining, sucked into a black hole, possibly dead, possibly alive. The sight of it caused beads of sweat to break out on Bai Xiaochun's forehead. He had never seen a demigod fighting before, and although he had experienced the terrifying power of that level because of the soul blood earlier, to witness it in full measure was completely different. It only served to increase his nervousness. He couldn't help but think back to everything that had happened, and how he had brazenly slapped the giant ghost king, not just once, but 7 or 8 times, until the man's face was completely swollen. Bai Xiaochun was wailing inwardly, and wondered what mystical foodstuffs he might have accidentally eaten to give him such gall. He had actually slapped a demigod expert across the face, over and over. Even as Bai Xiaochun sat there in misery, the giant ghost king looked over at the fleeing Kai clan patriarch. Snorting coldly, he opened his fist and then made a grasping gesture. Instantly, rumbling sounds echoed out, and the entire world seemed to turn upside down. Even time seemed to flow in reverse, as though the giant ghost king now controlled all natural law with the movement of his hand. To Bai Xiaochun's astonishment, he saw the fleeing Kai clan patriarch's nascent divinity suddenly flying backward at top speed, a look of utter terror on his face. No, no, I beg for mercy, your highness, please. The Kai clan patriarch trembled as he seemingly moved backward through time until he appeared in front of the giant ghost king, who reached out and grabbed him by the neck. Before the man could say anything else, the giant ghost king causally twisted his fingers. A scream echoed out as the Kai clan patriarch's entire nascent divinity collapsed into pieces. However, things weren't over yet. As the nascent divinity began to disperse, a shadowy soul could suddenly be seen. It was none other than a diva soul. As soon as it appeared, an intangible vortex sprang up in the sky. Closer inspection revealed that within that vortex was a flowing river filled with countless vengeful souls. It was none other than the underworld river. As the river and vortex appeared, a gravitational force sprang up that contained natural law. It grabbed a hold of the diva soul and began to tug it up. At that point, though, the giant ghost king snorted coldly and reached out with his right hand. Instantly, wild colors flashed in heaven and earth, and the gravitational force began to fade away. Apparently, the vortex and the underworld river didn't wish to fight with a demigod. Gradually, they faded away, and the diva soul floated down into the giant ghost king's hand. Within that soul, it was possible to detect a metal-type aura, as well as a bit of heterogeneous lightning power. And thus, matters ended. In the briefest of moments, the giant ghost king killed one of the 3 devas and dispatched the other 2, although whether that was into death or not was impossible to tell at the moment. Bai Xiaochun's scalp was tingling so hard it felt like it might explode, and he was shaking visibly. Sweat poured down him as a feeling of profound disquiet rose up. As he glanced at the giant ghost king out of the corner of his eye, the man turned and looked at him, his vision as sharp as a blaze as it pierced into Bai Xiaochun's mind. Clearly, he could kill him with a mere thought if he wanted to. Bai Xiaochun was panting, his mind spinning as he sensed the destructive power of the giant ghost king. He almost felt like a mortal staring into the gaping maw of a fierce tiger. The pressure was impossible to describe, the type which could overturn heaven and earth with no effort. Bai Hao, give me one good reason not to kill you. The giant ghost king's words rumbled like heavenly thunder, shaking everything in the world, and Bai Xiaochun along with it. The pressure coming off of the giant ghost king had Bai Xiaochun trembling physically, as if he were a tiny rowboat in a thrashing ocean of angry waves. In fact, he had the premonition that if he made the slightest mistake, he would be destroyed in both body and soul. The words the giant ghost king had uttered just now had Bai Xiaochun scared out of his mind. He didn't need to think very hard to come up with multiple responses. Whether it was their agreement, or the desperate show he had put on, or the fact that he had saved the giant ghost king's life, they all seemed like viable options. However, Bai Xiaochun had the strong feeling that he couldn't use any of those as his answer. The giant ghost king was aware of all of those things already, and the fact that he had asked the question he did was very, very telling. Trembling in fear, Bai Xiaochun contemplated the fact that the words he uttered next would very likely determine his ultimate fate. He had not experienced many situations in life that were this nerve-wracking. That was especially true when he looked up at the giant ghost king's cold, merciless eyes. Looking into those eyes only seemed to confirm his deepest fears. He's holding a metal-type diva soul in his hand. It seems obvious he's trying to send a message with that. And yet, he also seems like he wants to kill me. I can't trust the restrictive spell either. Unsure of what to do, Bai Xiaochun felt like he finally understood that old saying, being in the king's company is like living with a tiger. The giant ghost king he was facing right now was the real giant ghost king, and yet, for some reason, that only made Bai Xiaochun feel like walking up and slapping him across the side of the head again. Of course, as soon as the thought occurred to him, he shoved it away. So, feel like slapping me across the side of the head? The giant ghost king asked placidly, his voice cutting like the winter wind. Suddenly, the pressure radiating off of him grew even more powerful, crushing down on everything in the area. He's still pissed off at me. Bai Xiaochun thought, if I don't word things just right, I'm going to be in profound danger. Although he was inwardly trembling in terror, his eyes were bloodshot with the realization that true men had to be flexible. In that instant, his eyes shone with burning zeal. Your Highness, he said, sounding very excited. Your Highness, I didn't understand it before, but now I understand that Your Highness definitely deserves to be Your Highness. You are so intelligent and wise that within 5 days, you completely turned the world upside down. You truly ripped open the overcast grayness to reveal the sunny sky beyond. Every cloud has a silver lining, and you found that silver lining. Bai Xiaochun's eyes shone with unprecedented excitement, and in fact, it was even possible to see tears of joy glistening within them. The giant ghost king was so surprised that a strange expression flickered across his face. However, moments later, he was just as solemn as before as he coolly said, You're so excited you're crying? Your Highness, Bai Xiaochun replied loudly, you truly looked formidable and mighty just now. The wave of your finger wiped out all of those devas. I, Bai Hao, have never seen such an impressive display of heroism in my life. The mere thought of becoming the follower of a hero like you, sir, is an honor the likes of which couldn't be repeated for many generations. That is why I am overwhelmed with joy. Bai Xiaochun was apparently so excited he was trembling. An expression of utter zeal overtook his face, and his tears of joy were enough to cause anyone to stare in shock. A strange expression could be seen on the giant ghost king's face. Never could he have imagined that this Bai Hao would be skilled at this sort of thing. When Bai Xiaochun saw that look in the giant ghost king's eyes, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Now that he was sure this method would work, he knew that he had to go in for the kill. Putting an expression of utter reverence on his face, he clasped hands and bowed deeply for a long moment. Then he slowly got back up, looking very impassioned. Your Highness, you are wise, intelligent, and courageous, a person who is clever in ways that defy description, a hero who has come out victorious in hundreds of battles, an individual of outstanding talent and bearing, a man versatile and adept in all things, someone who surpasses all other living persons, and who has traveled the length and the breadth of the lands. I, Bai Hao, will follow you to the ends of the earth and beyond. Sir, I know in my heart that you would never do anything to harm such a charming and pitiable young child such as myself. Bai Hao looked anxiously at the giant ghost king, having gone all in with everything he could think of. Actually, the crux of everything was his final sentence, in which he spoke the true feelings of his heart. By this point, Bai Xiaochun almost seemed like he was begging and pleading, and had no idea whether or not he had made the right decision to go with this tactic. A profound expression of contemplation could be seen on the giant ghost king's face, but inwardly, he wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Never before had he encountered a person like Bai Xiaochun, who dared to talk in such a way to a somber person like himself. However, the more he listened, the more he liked what he heard, and suddenly, a bit of softness could be seen in his eyes. The truth was that moments ago, there really had been a bit of killing intent in him. After all, if it weren't for Bai Xiaochun, he would never have been in any real danger. However, the events of the past 5 days really had softened even his iron heart a bit, and left an impression that would never be removed. Unfortunately, Bai Xiaochun was an anomaly that he could never have planned for. If he took him back to Giant Ghost City now, then based on everything which had happened, it was easy to imagine how powerful Bai Xiaochun would become later on. He would definitely be one of the most influential people in the city. If he had planned for that all along, then it wouldn't have been a big deal. But to suddenly be presented with this unexpected turn of events left a sour taste in his mouth. Therefore, he let Bai Xiaochun make the final decision. If he tried to fall back on their previous agreement and demand compensation, then the giant ghost king would never give him the diva soul. Instead, he would seal him until the restrictive spell could be unraveled. Afterward, he would be released secretly somewhere outside of Giant Ghost City, all ties to the giant ghost king cut. After that point, his life would be in his own hands, and things would be back to the way they had been in the beginning. If Bai Xiaochun mentioned how bitter the past few days had been, then the giant ghost king would give him the diva soul and send him on his way. His life would be in his own hands, and there would be no connection between them anymore. With either of those two options, the giant ghost king would not bring him back to Giant Ghost City to bask in glory. If Bai Xiaochun acted stubbornly, and dared to slap him across the side of the head again, or demanded mercy based on supposed kindnesses from before, then the giant ghost king would disregard everything from before and kill him. These were the 3 options he had expected Bai Xiaochun to pick from. However, contrary to all expectations, Bai Xiaochun had created something from nothing and made up a 4th option. And thus, a strange, helpless expression could be seen in the giant ghost king's eyes. Inside, he was cursing a bit at everything that had happened with this slippery rogue. However, his killing intent and sinister plans evaporated. In fact, he couldn't help but notice how badly injured Bai Xiaochun was, and even began to think about everything that had happened as they fled together. There was also that scene of sincere bravery in the final, critical moment. Being the wily old fox that he was, the giant ghost king could tell that part had been no act. At this point, his ruthless heart truly began to soften. Then he thought about the string of flattering words that had just been uttered, especially the last line, which pushed the giant ghost king into that spot between laughter and tears. At this point, his expression turned cold once again, and he waved his hand, sending the metal-type diva soul flying over to Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun had been very carefully observing the giant ghost king's expression the entire time. As the moments had ticked by, he had grown more and more nervous, to the point where his feelings were perfectly described by the old saying: his heart was beating like 15 buckets in a well, 8 going down while 7 were coming up. He couldn't calm down. That was when, to his shock, the diva soul flew toward him, and the giant ghost king turned and looked up into the sky as if he were about to leave. Unsure of exactly what the giant ghost king was thinking, Bai Xiaochun grabbed the soul and then hesitated about what to do next. Was he supposed to offer his farewells at this point? Was the giant ghost king not going to mention anything that had happened early on? Even as Bai Xiaochun stood there wondering what to do, the giant ghost king spoke in a cold voice. "What are you standing around for? I'm going back to Giant Ghost City. Don't tell me you're planning to walk back by yourself?" A tremor ran through Bai Xiaochun, and his expression immediately brightened. As of this moment, he knew that he had passed all the tests, and that the giant ghost king planned to take him back with him. Bai Xiaochun could only imagine the luxurious life he would be living soon, and immediately flew up into the air to follow. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.